Martin Grayson's eyes opened precisely at 6 a.m., just like they had every weekday for the past 30 years. He didn't need an alarm. His body was trained, disciplined by decades of routine, a legacy of both his time in the military and his service as the sheriff of Fair Hollow County. Still groggy, he reached his hand across the bed, expecting to feel the warmth of his wife. But the sheets were cool, and the space beside him was empty. A familiar scent drifted through the house, fresh brewed coffee mingled with a whisper of jasmine perfume. Madison was already downstairs. Martin smiled to himself. In all the years they had shared this life together, she had never once let him leave for work without breakfast. It wasn't just a habit. It was an act of love. He swung his legs out of bed and made his way down the old wooden staircase of their two-story Victorian home, the crown jewel of Fair Hollow, a small town of just over 4,000 nestled among rolling hills and whispering pines. The townsfolk admired them, even revered them. Martin, the ever-dependable sheriff. Madison, the radiant socialite who organized every charity gala and garden luncheon with the precision of a queen. "Good morning, darling," Madison greeted as he stepped into the sunlit kitchen. She stood at the stove in a silk robe, golden hair pinned back loosely, her silhouette graceful even in the soft morning light. At 57, Madison looked barely 45, not because of surgical miracles, though she'd had a few discreet touch-ups, but because she carried herself with the kind of confidence and elegance that made you forget time existed. "Morning, sweetheart," Martin said as he leaned in to kiss her cheek. "Up early again?" "I needed to finish the arrangements for the library fundraiser tonight," she replied with a soft smile. "Don't tell me you forgot." He chuckled. Of course not. He had. But Madison, ever organized, always remembered for both of them. Breakfast, as always, was perfect. Herb scrambled eggs, buttered toast, and coffee brewed just the way he liked it. They took their plates out to the veranda, where the spring breeze rustled through an immaculate garden, every rose bush and tulip bed sculpted to perfection by Madison's meticulous hands. "Ray's been asking again," Martin said, half laughing between bites. "Wants to know your beauty secrets." Madison gave a coy smile, though Martin noticed a tightness behind her eyes. "Tell him the secret's a good marriage. You wake up 30 years later with a man who still sees you like you're the eighth wonder of the world, and who needs facelifts." He smiled, but the tension in her voice lingered like a subtle warning bell in the back of his mind. They had met in Chicago, 32 years ago. Martin had been a young police officer fresh from the military. She was striking, not because of any loud beauty, but because of something deeper. A grace. A quiet strength. She told him early on that she'd grown up in an orphanage, never knew her parents, and had one brother, Daniel, who had drifted out of her life long ago. Martin had never pressed for more. Everyone had scars. Some were better left untouched. A year after they married, they moved to Fair Hollow, where Martin had been offered a deputy sheriff's post. Madison gave up a career in interior design in the city without complaint. Instead, she became the town's beating heart, redecorating their home into a cultural landmark and serving on every local committee. Together, they built a life so picturesque it bordered on unreal. As he stood to leave for work, Madison asked, "Will you be home before 6? "I'll try," he replied, donning his sheriff's hat. "Unless someone finally loses it in this peaceful little town." She smiled, and he kissed her goodbye. At the station, his longtime deputy, Ray Bennett, was already nursing his second cup of coffee. "Coffee?" Ray offered, raising a styrofoam cup. "Already had the good stuff at home," Martin said, hanging his hat and settling behind his desk. Most of the morning was uneventful. Just the usual, a few complaints from Mrs. Donaldson about kids loitering outside the drugstore, a stray dog reported near Route 14. But even amidst the silence, something tugged at Martin's gut, a whisper that something was coming. Something he couldn't name. After the routine morning patrol, Martin spent the afternoon giving a safety lecture at the high school, then attending a budget meeting at City Hall. He wrapped things up earlier than expected and decided to surprise Madison at home before the evening event. But as he pulled into the driveway, a strange chill crept over him. Her car wasn't there. That wasn't just odd, it was unheard of. On the day of a major event, Madison typically spent hours preparing. The house should have been buzzing with music, fresh flowers, and last-minute decorations. He opened the front door slowly. "Madison," he called. No response. On the kitchen table sat a note, neatly written in her familiar cursive. Had to make an emergency trip to Chicago to pick up some last-minute materials for the event. Be back by 6. Dinner's in the oven. Kisses. Martin stared at the note. Chicago was more than an hour away. Why hadn't she called him? Why a trip like that on such short notice? He pulled out his phone and dialed. Straight to voicemail. Still, he tried to dismiss it. Madison was detail-oriented. Maybe she just forgot. Maybe it wasn't a big deal. But the unease wouldn't let go. That evening, she was, as always, flawless. The library fundraiser was a triumph. Madison glided through the room like royalty, raising over $180,000 for the Children's Hospital wing. Everyone was in awe of her poise, her beauty, her effortless charm. But Martin, even as he smiled beside her, watched her with different eyes. She was distracted. Her eyes kept darting around. She touched her necklace more than usual. She forced her laugh, clutched her wine glass a little too tightly. Something was wrong. Later, on the drive home, he asked the question casually, but his chest was tight. "So, how was the trip to Chicago?" There was a brief pause. "It was fine," she said, too quickly. "Almost didn't get the flowers I needed, but I pulled it off. You could have called me. I'd have gone with you. It was spontaneous. You were busy." He let it go, but the pit in his stomach deepened. That night, she fell asleep quickly. Or pretended to. Martin lay awake beside her, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence in the room. A silence thick with the sound of unspoken truths. And something told him this was just the beginning. The next few days passed like any other in Fair Hollow: quiet streets, familiar smiles, and routines polished by years of repetition. But Martin Grayson's peace was unraveling, thread by thread. He began to notice little things. Madison's late-night calls. The way she would lower her voice and step into another room when answering. Twice, he'd walked in as she hastily ended a call, her expression unreadable. And then, Friday afternoon arrived, a turning point he didn't see coming. Martin came home early again. The house was still. He stepped inside just as the phone rang. Madison was upstairs, shower running. On instinct, Martin picked up. "Grayson Residence," he answered. A male voice crackled on the other end. "It's me. I have the results. We need to talk." Martin's stomach dropped. "I'm her husband," he said carefully. "Madison's not available right now." "Who's calling?" There was a long silence. Then, hastily, the man muttered, "Sorry, wrong number," and hung up. When Madison came down, wrapped in her robe and towel drying her hair, Martin relayed the call as casually as he could. "Strange one," he said, pouring himself a glass of water. "Some guy said he had results for you." Sounded urgent. He watched her reaction closely. Madison paled, but recovered almost instantly. "It's probably the debt collectors again," she shrugged. "They've been harassing people with the same last name. That's the third wrong call this month." Her voice was calm, but it was the kind of calm that was practiced, rehearsed. Martin didn't push. Not yet. But the weight in his chest grew heavier. On Saturday evening, they went to a barbecue at the Whitmore's place, longtime friends and neighbors. Dr. Thomas Whitmore had once served as a military doctor and now worked as a consultant at the local clinic. His wife Linda was a high school teacher and Madison's closest friend. The evening was warm, the grill sizzling with steaks, and the chatter light. Martin tried to relax, sipping beer with Thomas on the porch, but his mind kept circling the same question: what was Madison hiding? At one point, her phone buzzed on the table. Martin caught the flicker of alarm on her face. She stood up, excused herself with a forced smile, and disappeared into the garden. When she returned 5 minutes later, she looked pale. Martin met her eyes. "Everything okay?" She nodded, too quickly. "Just a design client. I might need to make another trip to Chicago next week." Thomas shot Madison a subtle glance, something only a doctor might notice, a flicker of professional concern. That night, back home, Madison claimed she had a headache and went straight to bed. Martin lingered in the living room, the silence of the house pressing down like a storm cloud. After half an hour, he quietly climbed the stairs. She was already in bed. Asleep, maybe. Or pretending. He noticed her phone on the bedside table, screen glowing softly in the dark. A notification blinked. Martin hesitated. Then, against every instinct, reached for the device. The screen was locked, but the message preview was visible. "Daniel, results confirmed. Time is short. We need to talk." His blood ran cold. Daniel. Her brother? The same brother she'd claimed to have lost contact with decades ago? Martin set the phone down, carefully. He lay in bed beside her, rigid and sleepless. Madison's breathing was steady, but he knew now that the space between them was no longer just physical. Something had cracked, quietly, deeply. By morning, she was gone again. Just a note on the counter. Had to go to Chicago. Back tonight. Don't worry. Love, M. Martin stared at it, heart pounding with unease. His thoughts swirled. Her secretiveness. The results. Daniel. It was all leading somewhere, and he wasn't sure he wanted to know where. When Madison returned that evening, she looked drained. Her smile faltered the second she saw him. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, kicking off her shoes. "I had to go. It couldn't wait." Martin muted the television and turned to face her fully. "What's going on, Maddie?" She sat beside him on the couch, exhaled slowly, and for the first time in weeks, the wall between them cracked. "I need to go to the hospital next week," she said, eyes downcast. "It's not serious. Just some kidney issues. They caught something early. It's manageable." Martin's heart stuttered. "Kidney? When did you find this out?" 2 weeks ago, she said. "During that trip for the fundraiser supplies." 2 weeks? Why didn't you tell me? "I didn't want to scare you. It's minor. Just some procedures. Outpatient. I'll be fine." "We'll go together," Martin said immediately. "I'll take time off. Ray can handle the station." "No," she replied firmly, her voice tightening. "You've got that meeting with the district attorney on Wednesday. I'll be in and out in a few days. Dr. Monroe's a friend of my doctor in Chicago. It's all arranged." Martin frowned. "You've made all the decisions already?" "I had to," she said, her tone soft but final. "I didn't want to be a burden." "A burden?" he repeated. "Madison, you're my wife." She gave him a weary smile and reached for his hand. "I just need you to trust me, Martin." But that trust had started to fray. And he couldn't pretend it hadn't. That night, she fell asleep in his arms for the first time in days. But Martin couldn't follow her into rest. His mind was racing. The next afternoon, he came home early again. He heard her in the backyard, talking on the phone. He stepped closer, just to hear. Her voice was low, urgent. Yes, everything's arranged. Dr. Monroe says the odds are good. I know the risks, Daniel. But there's no other way. A pause. Of course I love you. I always have. Martin stepped back quietly. Then entered the house through the front door, slamming it shut with a little more force than necessary. I'm home, he called. She answered from the kitchen, voice calm. By the time he walked in, she was stirring a pot on the stove, as if everything was perfectly normal. But everything was far from normal. And Martin knew, deep in his bones, that the truth was no longer something he could ignore. The days that followed were a strange dance of avoidance and routine. Madison went about her usual activities, tending to her garden, replying to emails from charity board members, cooking dinners as if nothing had shifted in their world. But Martin saw through it. Her smiles were thinner, her touches briefer. There was a tremor in the silence between them that neither dared acknowledge. On Tuesday morning, as they sat together at the breakfast table, Martin tried one more time. Tell me where you're going tomorrow, he said gently. Madison looked up from her tea. Chicago. Dr. Monroe's clinic. I told you already. And you're still refusing to let me come with you? Her voice was firm. Martin, please. Let me handle this. I promise I'll be back by the weekend. He clenched his jaw but nodded. The next morning, she packed a small suitcase, just a few essentials, and kissed him on the cheek before stepping into her car. Her hands trembled slightly as they brushed his, but her eyes held no fear. Only something deeper. A kind of sadness. I'll call you when I check in, she promised. Call me from the hospital, Martin said, his voice low. Tell me the name of the clinic. The room number. Everything. Madison hesitated, then nodded. I will. But the second her car turned the corner, Martin knew he couldn't sit still. He walked into his home office, shut the door, and turned on the computer. His fingers hovered over the keyboard before he typed into the browser history. Madison rarely cleared it. There it was. Kidney transplant compatibility with siblings. Risks of kidney donation over 55. Can kidney donors remain anonymous to family? Martin stared at the screen. His breath caught in his throat. She wasn't the patient. She was the donor. But to whom? His hands trembled as he clicked deeper. Genetic matches between full siblings. Donor compatibility with twins. And then the connection landed hard, like a stone in his chest. Daniel. Her long-lost brother wasn't lost at all. He was the recipient. Madison was going to donate a kidney to him, and she hadn't told Martin a damn thing. The phone rang. He picked it up, his pulse thudding in his ears. I made it, Madison said on the other end, her voice faint but calm. I'm checking in now. What's the name of the hospital? He asked. There was a pause. Chicago Memorial Medical. Nephrology Department. They haven't given me a room yet. I'll call once I'm settled. Call me, he said. Promise me. I promise, she whispered. And Martin. I love you. The line went dead. But her silence after that said everything. By noon, she still hadn't called. Martin's unease snapped into resolve. He walked into the station. Ray, he said to his deputy, I need you to hold down the fort. Something's come up. Personal. Ray raised an eyebrow. Everything okay? No, Martin said flatly. But I'm going to fix it. He changed out of his uniform, slipped on civilian clothes, and clipped his service weapon to his belt, not because he expected danger, but because it felt like armor. Something familiar to hold on to when the rest of the world had stopped making sense. The drive to Chicago blurred past in a flurry of trees and traffic. As the skyline emerged, so did a familiar knot in his stomach, fear, betrayal, confusion, all tangled up. At the hospital, he approached the front desk. "I'm looking for a patient. Madison Grayson. Admitted today to nephrology." The young receptionist typed, frowned. "I'm sorry, sir. There's no one by that name in the system." Martin's blood went cold. "She said she was being admitted today. I've only got 3 nephrology admissions this morning. None of them are named Madison." He swallowed hard. "What about Daniel Reeves?" he asked, voice tightening. The receptionist looked again. "Yes," she nodded. "Daniel Reeves was admitted to the transplant unit this morning. Room 512. Martin thanked her and moved swiftly to the 5th floor. The hallway was quiet, the lighting clinical and cold. He knocked on the door. "Come in," a man's voice answered. Inside, a thin man lay in bed, pale but alert. Blonde hair. Soft features. Too soft. Martin stepped forward. "Daniel Reeves?" The man's eyes flickered with recognition. "Yes. And you must be Martin." Martin didn't sit. "You're Madison's brother?" Daniel hesitated. "Yes." Martin's voice hardened. "She didn't tell me she was donating a kidney. She didn't tell me any of this." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "She didn't want you to worry." "I had a right to know," Martin snapped. "What the hell is going on here?" Daniel let out a slow breath. "You're right. You deserve to know the truth. But it's complicated. Try me." Daniel looked away for a moment. Then back at Martin. "We weren't just siblings. We were twins. Identical twins." Martin blinked. "That's not possible," he said. Daniel nodded solemnly. "We were both born male, Martin." The room tilted. Martin stepped back, chest heaving, as if the air had been sucked from the room. "No," he whispered. "Madison was born Edward. She transitioned before she met you. The surgeries, the therapy, it all happened years before you met her. You fell in love with the person she truly is." "You're lying," Martin said, his voice hoarse. Daniel shook his head. "She was going to tell you so many times. But after a while, she was terrified. Terrified of losing you." Martin turned and walked out without another word. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to get out. Out of the building. Out of this reality. But the truth followed. Loud. Clear. Unrelenting. The woman he had loved for 30 years, shared his life with, built a home with, dreamed with, had kept the biggest truth of all from him. He had married a woman who had once been a man. And now, he didn't know who he was either. The drive back to Fair Hollow was silent. Martin Grayson gripped the steering wheel like a lifeline, the world around him a blur. His ears still rang with Daniel's words. "We were both born male, Martin. Madison was Edward. 30 years of love. Of partnership. Of waking up beside the same woman. Of believing he knew her completely. It had all been built on something he hadn't seen, hadn't been told. Was it deception? Was it fear? Or was it love, too afraid to lose what it had finally found? By the time he pulled into the driveway, the sun was hanging low, casting long golden shadows across the porch. Madison was sitting in the living room, reading a book, as if nothing had changed. But when she saw the look in his eyes, she stood slowly, her face draining of color. "Martin," she asked. He didn't answer right away. He closed the door behind him, set his keys on the table with a loud clink, and stepped into the room. "I talked to Daniel." Madison's eyes closed, her body seeming to deflate. The words she had dreaded were finally spoken. "And he told me the truth. Her voice came, quiet, but without hesitation. Yes. Martin's hands were shaking. Is it true? Were you born a man? Yes, she said, meeting his eyes. But I've always been a woman. I didn't become someone new. I became who I always was. He turned away, pacing. The floor creaked beneath his boots. You lied to me, he said, his voice trembling with fury. For 30 goddamn years. I didn't lie, she said softly. I just didn't tell you. And then, after so long, I was afraid. That if I told you, I'd lose everything we built. You should have told me from the beginning. You wouldn't have stayed, she said. You don't know that, he snapped. Don't I? She whispered. Look at you. Martin stopped in his tracks. His chest was heaving, his fists clenched. He felt as if the ground beneath him had collapsed, leaving him in free fall. And yet, beneath all the rage, there was grief. And love. And unbearable confusion. I gave you my life, he said. I built everything with you. And now I don't even know who you are. I'm still me, Madison said, stepping closer. The woman who made your coffee every morning. Who stayed up waiting for you on late nights. Who held you when your father died. That was real. I'm real. Martin staggered back, shaking his head. I don't know what's real anymore. He reached for his holster without even thinking, not with intent, just instinct, muscle memory, something to hold. Something familiar. But when he raised the gun, Madison froze. Martin, she said, her voice trembling but calm, please, put it down. How could you do this to me? His hand was shaking now, the gun loose in his grip. How could you look at me, every day, knowing what you were hiding? I loved you, she said. I still love you. And I know this is too much. But I never wanted to hurt you. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't move. Didn't run. She stood there, arms slightly raised, as if trying to reach him without touching him. Outside, a sharp crack shattered the air. A firecracker, left over from some neighborhood kids, exploded near the front window. Martin flinched. His finger jerked. The gun went off. The sound inside the house was deafening, final. Madison stumbled backward, eyes wide with shock, a bloom of red spreading across her chest. She collapsed to the floor, gasping, eyes searching for him. Martin dropped the gun. No, 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 he whispered, rushing to her side. He dropped to his knees, gathering her into his arms, pressing his hands to her wound. Oh God. Oh God, no. Madison's lips moved. A whisper. A word he couldn't make out. I didn't mean to, he sobbed. I swear to God, Maddie. I didn't mean to. He fumbled for his phone, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. My wife, he choked out. I shot her. Please, please send help. Please. Madison's body grew heavy in his arms. Her breathing slowed. Stay with me, he begged. Please. I love you. I love you. Her fingers clutched his weakly, then slipped from his grip. And just like that, she was gone. The paramedics arrived minutes later, but it was too late. The woman he had spent his life with, the woman who had lived with a secret too heavy to bear, lay still in his arms, her blood staining the carpet beneath them. Martin didn't resist when they cuffed him. He barely heard the Miranda rights read to him. Didn't flinch when they took the gun into evidence. At the station, Ray Bennett stared at him in disbelief. Martin, what the hell happened? Martin looked up, eyes hollow. She was a man. Ray stepped back, stunned. And because of that, he asked, voice trailing off. I don't know, Martin whispered. I lost control. I lost myself. He was transferred to the county jail that night. Alone in a gray cell, stripped of his badge, his gun, his life, Martin Grayson stared at the blank wall across from him. The worst prison wasn't made of steel and stone. It was the prison inside his own heart. 3 days after the shooting, Martin sat alone in a cold interrogation room, wrists chained to a metal table. Detective Nora Whitmore, stern, intelligent, and respected throughout the state, slid a thin case file across the table. She studied the man sitting before her. The ex-sheriff. The husband. The killer. Mr. Grayson, she said evenly, you understand the charges against you? Martin nodded. I do. Murder in the second degree, she continued. But based on your statement and the evidence, the district attorney may consider manslaughter. It depends on the full picture. Martin said nothing. Do you admit to shooting Madison Grayson? His voice was dry. Yes. Was it intentional? He stared down at his hands, the same hands that had held Madison every morning for 30 years, the same hands that had pulled the trigger. No, he said. But it happened. And nothing changes that. Nora leaned back in her chair. Did she ever threaten you? No. Physically assault you? No. So what happened? Martin exhaled, slow and heavy. I lost control. I found out who she was, who she had been, and I didn't know how to process it. I drew the gun, not to shoot her, not to hurt her. I needed something to hold. Something real. Then the firecracker went off, and he couldn't finish. Detective Whitmore scribbled a few notes. Do you feel remorse? Martin looked up, his eyes rimmed red. Every second, he said. She closed the file, paused at the door, and turned one last time. You know, Mr. Grayson, sometimes the worst prison isn't the one with bars. It's the one inside your own head. And with that, she left him alone. The trial made headlines statewide. A beloved sheriff. A mysterious wife. A 30-year marriage built on love, and a secret no one saw coming. Some condemned Madison for hiding her identity. Others condemned Martin for being unable to accept it. But most didn't know what to feel, just that 2 lives had been destroyed. Daniel Reeves never returned to Fair Hollow. He buried his sister quietly, placing a bouquet of white roses, her favorite, on her grave before disappearing into anonymity. In town, the whispers lingered. Neighbors passed Martin's old house with caution, as if the ghosts inside might spill out. The garden, once bursting with color, wilted. The house fell into silence. In prison, Martin was kept under observation. Not because he was dangerous, but because he was hollow. Every day, he sat at the edge of his cot, holding the only item he was allowed to keep, a black and white wedding photo. Madison was laughing in the image, her veil swept slightly by the wind, her smile luminous. He ran his thumb along her face. I didn't understand, he whispered. And now it's too late. Months passed. Then a year. His trial ended with a conviction for voluntary manslaughter. 15 years without parole. And he accepted it. Not as punishment. But as penance. Occasionally, Ray Bennett would visit. They sat in silence mostly. 2 men who had seen too much of life, and now saw too little of each other. She loved you, you know, Ray once said, breaking a long silence. I know, Martin replied. I just didn't see her clearly until it was too late. In the final letter he wrote to Daniel Reeves, never mailed, never shown, he penned. You had more courage than I ever will. You stood by her, even when she was someone the world wouldn't understand. I failed her. But if you remember her, truly, then maybe a piece of her still lives free. And somewhere, beneath layers of guilt and brokenness, a part of Martin still held that memory. The memory of a woman who loved deeply. Who fought for her truth. Who gave without asking. Who hid her past not out of shame, but out of fear that the one person she loved most might stop seeing her for who she was. Her name was Madison. She was never a lie. She was always real. And Martin Grayson would spend the rest of his life remembering her that way, through regret, through pain, and through a kind of broken love that never truly dies.